Hello, good morning, and welcome to our event, Autism in Africa and China in the Coronavirus Era, whilst implementing the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and Towards Africa Agenda 2063. I would like to first and foremost pay tribute to His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, who passed away today. Today was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but it has indeed been marred by the sudden passing of His Royal Highness. May his memory be a blessing. If I may start by quoting the former executive director of UNICEF, I quote, "More than ever, as the world embarks on the path to the Sustainable Development Goals, investing in children, particularly the poorest and most disadvantaged children, is the right thing to do. It is the smartest thing to do, and it is only fair. Ask any child," end of quote. I'd also like to quote from Dr. Ibrahim Asani Mayaki, CEO of NEPAD, Planning and Coordinating Agency. I quote, "Africa's challenges are how to foster inclusive prosperity, reduce the potential for violent confrontation, and create conditions for peaceful coexistence. And this is indeed the Africa we want." As the world marked the 25th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we need to address the age-old challenges of inequality, those who have been left behind, and problems which affect the most disadvantaged children, particularly those in Africa and China. Africa's increasing share of the world's child population makes investing in children with autism and diverse disabilities, particularly the poorest, more imperative than ever. Children in Africa remain excluded from the progress of the past 25 years. Whilst on the one hand, the cost of these inequities is paid most immediately by the children themselves, the long-term impact affects generations to come, undermining the strength of their societies. These vast inequities and dangers do more than violate the rights and futures of the children. In short, they perpetuate intergenerational cycles of disadvantage and inequity that in the long run undermine the stability and also international peace and security. Autism is a complex neurological disorder that inhibits a person's ability to communicate and above all develop relationship. 1 in 10 children in the United States are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, affecting 4 times as many girls and boys. Indeed, it has been labeled a national public health crisis whose cure remains unknown. The purpose of this meeting is to raise awareness of the challenges faced by children with autism in Africa and China, to enhance collaboration and cooperation between all member states in order to share experiences and knowledge and raise awareness of autism in Africa and China. Now it gives me great pleasure to hand across to Her Excellency, Dr. Mawama Kasesa Boto, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Republic of Zambia to the United Nations.
And I'm a medical doctor, and I went all over looking for a speech therapist in Zambia. I couldn't find any. There was one, however, and that was the only one everybody was using. It was very challenging to find the right environment for her. It's completely on all of us here to ensure that we are a voice for the voiceless. We are privileged to be here at the United Nations, the headquarters of international diplomacy as well as international relations. So we must ensure that we speak and raise the bar high for this group of children. They should not just be the unknown statistics that we keep talking about. We need to bring them out and ensure that they are not left behind of the 2030 by ensuring that the entire global community rally behind providing services for this group of children, especially in Africa, where the services, including the condition itself, is almost not known. I thank you.
Autism is an unknown disability in most of our society in Africa. In Uganda, persons with autism do not fit into any known category of disability, and in most cases, they are often classified by people as victims of mental sickness, witchcraft, or bad omen to the family. This group is subjected to psychiatric services and confinement, and also a good number of them are confined to mental hospitals, and others are treated with traditional remedies. We need to know their abilities and support them to develop their talents to be able to live a better life. I thank you.
On behalf of my country, Malawi, otherwise known as the warm heart of Africa, allow me to express sincere gratitude to the Engineer Ajaheze Foundation for this commendable initiative of organizing this type of forum to bring autism to the front burner of international diplomacy. I would also like to thank the permanent missions seated at this table for hosting this particular event. Hosting this particular event is timely, especially because last Friday, in this very building, we were commemorating 10 years of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. As we are all aware, autism is a complex neurological disorder of development which inhibits a person's ability to communicate and develop sustainable social relationships, with autistic children displaying impaired normal childhood play and non-physical disability.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm honored that Israel is honored to take part in today's special event. Our commitment to Africa is a top priority, a top policy priority for Israel, and comes from the heart. The architect of Israeli-African relations was Golda Meir, our first woman prime minister, who was then serving as Israel's foreign minister. And she said, with regard to then newly formed African nations in the 50s, Israel has shaken off foreign rule like the African nations. We have learned for ourselves how to reclaim the land, how to increase the yields of our crops, how to irrigate, how to raise poultry, how to live together, and how to defend ourselves. In the years following those statements, Israeli-African relations went through changes, sometimes even for the worse, but our commitment stayed robust. The highlight of the relation between Israel and Africa came this year with Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to Africa, where he met heads of African states and where he declared officially that Israel is going back to Africa and Africa is going back to Israel. Actually, we were always there, but if there is changes politically now. During the high-level week of the General Assembly, we were proud to host an event on Israeli technology in Africa, and a high-level meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and 17 leaders of African states.
It's a life-saving awareness whilst implementing the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is a global health priority. According to the World Health Organization, ASD affects 1 in every 160 children. In Kenya, like in many African countries, disabilities, both physical and neurological, are often hidden away, as seen and usually seen as a family problem that only the family should deal with. Therefore, supportive services are very few and far apart. In conclusion, I am very grateful with all and appreciate all our partners in this discussion and to be part. And I'm also very grateful to be part of the beginning of a conversation that seeks to ensure that the Agenda 2030 for development delivers for persons with ASD. I thank you.
As a serious development disorder in Africa, and to align the consideration and approach to this disorder with the priorities of the 2013 Agenda and the 2063 Agenda. Globally, 1 in every 160 persons is estimated to live with ASD. And although the prevalence of Autism in Africa and other low or middle income regions is still unclear, it is our responsibility to with the ultimate goals of embarking on policies that will improve the fate of children living with autism. Once more, I wish to express our gratitude for your gracious invitation to be a part of today's important proceedings, and I would like to assure you that we will extend all the necessary support to actualize and consolidate the gains of today's discussions. I thank you, Madam President.
We have gathered today to reaffirm our will and commitment to work together in the area of awareness raising of autism spectrum disorders. While awareness is growing in many parts of the world, we focus our attention today in particular on Africa. Since the ratification by Poland in 2012, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the issue of the protection of the rights remains of particular importance for my government. The Convention provides the legal framework to eliminate the barriers in all spheres of life, enabling persons with disabilities to gain their independence. We have been trying to work with various stakeholders to promote the rights of persons with disabilities globally. Along with the Republic of Korea, last year we put forward the third committee resolution entitled Towards the Full Realization of Inclusive and Accessible UN for Persons with Disabilities, as we believe that through joint collaboration between member states and the UN, we can improve the living conditions of all persons with disabilities all over the world.
It now gives me great pleasure to hand across to Dr. Stephen J. Hegedus, Dean of the College of Education, Southern Connecticut State University. I believe you're sharing a screen with Professor Fred.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can, Professor.
Very good.
Dean.
Thank you, Dr. Isaac. Thank you very much. I'm very appreciative of joining you and all the esteemed colleagues on this call today. This is very, very important work for me personally and for our college and university and many other partners around the world. So personal thank you for us being able to be here together today.
Thank you, Dean.
So as Dr. Volkmar will bring up the slides, I'm going to talk just for a few minutes, and then Dr. Volkmar will talk for a few minutes. So our presentation is collective. I'm very honored to be here today also with our esteemed guest, Dr. Fred Volkmar, who is really a founding force and an intellectual force in the field of autism, and he has done wonderful things. We are very proud and privileged to have him also as our endowed chair here at Southern Connecticut State University, here in New Haven, Connecticut. There are two universities. There is Yale and there's Southern Connecticut. So we have the proud connection to have Dr. Volkmar both working with us to accelerate and educate. That is critical. And I think this is a major purpose of today. Next slide, please. We established a great connection. It only seems yesterday, Dr. Eze, but we were with you at the UN now 4 years ago, and we were very, very happy to be with you and your colleagues around the world and to establish this really fundamental partnership. Next slide. So I'm here to just, for me, encapsulate what I believe, we believe is a very fundamental perspective on drawing in two very deep historical and broad perspectives and epistemologies. 30 seconds, I am a mathematician and an educator. I started my career in England. I was born in England. I started at Oxford University. I came to the States about over 20 years ago. I taught mathematics and education at the University of Massachusetts, and I've been here at Southern Connecticut State University for almost 7 years as the Dean of the College of Education. For me, mathematics is very similar in terms of how we are trying to address a deep systemic problem, both in our nation and across the world. I have done a lot of work in trying to broaden access to a broad variety of learners, and I have learned so much in coming into contact with our colleagues here at Southern and in other places around the world with regards to how to bring together education and medicine so that we can actually make a big systemic change in our society. Similar to mathematics, we have very deep issues regards to the stigma that's attached. These are social, these are political, these are cultural, but our work has to be a combination of both understanding how to understand the medical and scientific aspects of diagnosing and screening, and how we can then also provide access to a broad population, national and international, in how to diagnose early, how to intervene, and how to be productive, and to make this something that is well understood by our general population. Thank you. Next slide, please, Fred. This is not a very thin sliver of our society. This is a very deep systemic issue. Look at this very simple chart here. It is identified in many countries, but around the world, it's not always known how to identify and what label to put on it. Next slide, please. So why is education important? And from my own perspective here as well today, and with my colleagues here in Connecticut, we've done some work, but our work needs to be collaborative. It needs to be together nationally and internationally. We have done some work in education going back 50 years. And this has led to some learning outcomes. There have been changes here in the States by doing early diagnosis and intervention. That's a critical factor that we need to present in the education, not of schools, but of our communities around us. And here on this slide, there are some details of early results in our studies. There have been improved outcomes, and this has come through various mandates in our legislative assemblies. And I think the important point here is that this is not just an academic issue. This is a societal issue, and this is something that we need to work on together. And I'm very proud to be with people today that can have that voice and leverage to help us, help our legislators, help our policymakers, and help those who can improve the situation around us. We have students now on the spectrum who are going to college. This was unheard of, I understand, years ago, maybe also in other countries, right, Dr. Volkmar? I mean, this is we here at Southern Connecticut State University now have 40 students who have identified themselves to be on the spectrum. We're working very closely with them. Just to even self-identify is a step forward. And then we can help provide guidance with these students and help others in other countries with you today on the things we are developing, the services that we are trying to operationalize and integrate in very culturally sensitive ways. So I want to just stress that we are here also as a resource to help in an educative sense. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, these are worldwide needs. This is something I've understood as an educator as well. We need to work on early diagnosis, early screening, and this is very, very important. And Dr. Volkmar will discuss in a very few minutes how we can do this, and we can do this very effectively with some biomarkers as well very early on. Critical factor: early diagnosis, screening, provide those services that are needed, help the school systems, help the parents and the communities around them to understand what is needed. This is a disorder, and this is something that we can help support. And again, investment needs to be made because there's a lack of access to the training. We here at Southern Connecticut State University are doing many things in our preparation of teachers and in our advanced programs, our master's programs and our doctoral programs, to prepare and advance our students, our teachers, and our leaders in this state, our principals and superintendents, to understand the work and the treatments that are necessary. But it needs to broaden and be systemic. Next slide, please. And this is just to round up, there are cultural issues in autism. In my own work, I'm a sociocultural theorist, and this is a complex field. And thankfully, there is a growing body of work on this topic, and I'm also looking to help with in working in this field as well with Dr. Volkmar. There are cultural issues that are propagated in our societies. And so that needs to be juxtaposed with the medical, the educational issues. We need to understand how to diagnose and understand that these approaches are culturally sensitive, that they are effective, and that they can be accommodated and embedded within the family system, within the values of the system that the students, the learners are within. So that we need to be very aware of the cultural context of the work that we're doing. And that is a new advancement in our work. there have been some recent publications in this area. And this is very fascinating work. And I think we're going to share some of these references that Dr. Volkmar has collaborated with. Even eye contact, it's a fascinating area of how different cultures use their various modalities to engage and communicate. So I love that we can continue this field of research as well to inform how we can do a lot of the work in a wide variety of contexts. And of course, this is diverse and varies within the countries and the cultures around our world. Finally here, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Volkmar. We are very proud to be have here at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, our Board of Regents Center of Excellence in Autism Spectrum Disorders. And this was established over 10 years ago with some support at the time from the federal government. There were some earmarked funds. And then since then, those funds, as often happens, have passed away. But we've built on that structure, though. We've built on the work of those initial founders to support training, research, and outreach. And that's why we're here today. That's very much part of who we are and what we want to do. And we have developed many videos for teachers, and we're going to be able to share these with you. This has been through the support of personal donors that have been able to support our work, to reach out to you and to many others in a wide variety of languages to begin and accelerate our educational mission. So I thank you for allowing me a few minutes today to share something that I'm very passionate about, very committed to here in my leadership role at Southern Connecticut State University. And I'm very proud to pass to Dr. Fred Volkmar, our director here, to give you some further information and slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dean.
So let me say a little bit about autism and what it is. Autism is first and foremost a problem of social interaction that's associated with unusual patterns of learning and behavior with over-engagement with the non-social world and under-engagement with the social world. It was first described in 1943, but clearly cases were seen much earlier. The word autism itself, the Greek word, actually interestingly has two different meanings depending on the context within which it's used. Excuse me. One has to do with social isolation, but the other has to do with sameness. So it's a very good word in capturing these two things that Leo Connor talked as being essential in autism: the lack of social engagement and a desire of change, avoidance of change, wanting sameness in the world around you. The impact of the lack of interest in others from the moment of birth is profound. If you don't play the social game from the first minutes of life, you're at a great disadvantage. You don't pay attention to your parents. You don't learn from other people. You don't have a strong interest in communicating. You often develop very rigid and very maladaptive styles of learning, where you're over-engaged with the non-social world. You're looking at the cracks in the floor or the tiles in the ceiling or anything of the light switches, but you're not engaging with the teacher in the classroom. If left untreated, this leads to severe social isolation, but more importantly also to problems with language, often a total lack of language, and can lead to severe intellectual deficiency, mental retardation. There are some common misconceptions of autism. One misconception from the earliest work was that autism came from families that were very well educated and successful. This was caused back in the 1930s and 40s. Those were the people who could contact the only person in the world, the only child psychiatrist in the world at that point, Leo Connor. We see autism everywhere. Autism occurs in all countries and all cultures. How it's viewed and how it's treated is different, but the fundamental phenomenon of autism is worldwide. People used to think autism was always associated with special abilities. That only happens about 10% of the time. They thought it was not associated with medical problems. We know that autism is frequently associated with medical problems, commonly with seizures. About 1 in 5 children with autism will also develop a seizure disorder. So it was very clear autism was brain-based. Autism, there was some misconception that autism was related to vaccinations. There's no connection with vaccinations. Vaccinations are an important public health value, and it's something we need to promote. It's not related to autism at all. We know right now that autism is brain-based, that it's strongly genetic. It tends to run in families. It doesn't always do that, but it tends to. It responds best to structured teaching rather than unstructured psychotherapy. And we also know that over the last decades, outcome has really substantially improved. When I first came to New Haven back in 1980 to work with a man named Donald Cohen at the Child Study Center at Yale to do autism research, 90% of the time, the people I saw with autism had severe intellectual deficiency or mental retardation. Many of them, probably most of them, were mute and unresponsive. These days, that's totally changed. As you heard the dean say, we now have students going to college very frequently. The outcome has substantially improved. Probably at least 30%, if not more, of people with autism in the United States are going on to lead independent and self-sufficient lives. That's a marked change from several decades ago. There's also been reduced stigma, which I think is an important thing to consider in other countries as well, because I know certainly in Africa there are issues, as in China, issues around stigma associated with all kinds of developmental disabilities. The official recognition of autism did not come until 1980, but in the meantime, events in the media started to change people's perception of autism. The movie Rain Man was a really classic movie that changed people's views. Rain Man is not correct in all of its details, but it gave a lot of emphasis to people understanding what autism was about and that people with autism needed to be included, that you could have relationships and family relationships. Parents also began to start advocating for their children, and this has led in the United States to the creation of parent support groups and foundations, the Autism Science Foundation, Autism Speaks, that actually do a tremendous amount of positive work on behalf of children with autism. So our call for advocacy is to tell the story and advocate for change around the world, to educate various groups in society, schools, communities, parents, and others about what autism is and what we can do to help children with ASD. We raise funds to support various projects, lecture series, as you heard the dean mention. Our donor, the Slifka Foundation, gave us support to fund an entire lecture series for teachers. And we want to establish an infrastructure to sustain this work ongoing into the future. And we also want to foster international dissemination and connections. We also need to look at new models of educational and medical intervention and service around the world. The models are more or less the same. The medical system diagnoses autism, educators treat autism by and large. And there needs to be a connection between these two, but there also needs to be education on both sides. In countries where resources are limited, we need to think about who is going to be providing the service. Who is going to be doing the screening to make the diagnosis? Can we adapt or provide new methods for coming up with screening procedures in countries that can't afford the luxury of a 1-hour test with a psychologist, but where there might be a health visitor who could ask 3 questions of a parent, or a teacher who needs to know what she or he can do in a one-room school in Africa or in China, or she has 20 or he has 20 other children to serve as well. We also know there's a great range of need. We have a range of need for teacher training. Teachers need to understand more about autism, that there are many things you can do in very simple ways to improve the learning abilities of children with autism. We have to be culturally sensitive, as the dean mentioned. We know that there are changes depending on the cultures and how autism presents itself and what people can do in terms of treatment. We have to educate parents. One of the problems for people with autism is that they tend to learn in a very isolated, narrow way, and they tend to learn things in chunks. One thing we can try to have families help us do is extend learning outside of schools. So the same math that the dean teaches in the classroom should be extended to the grocery store or shopping, so that children get the idea of how there's a range of skills. This often becomes a real roadblock, especially for our more able students who cognitively can solve problems, but when put in the real world, freeze because they can't generalize their knowledge. Medically, we need to foster earlier case identification and awareness. This is a major task, and it's one that in this country we are really taking very seriously. There are some new approaches that are about to come online, looking at more biomedical ways to screen for autism. We'll need to think about how we can translate those into methods that can be used in other countries and in other cultures, and also thinking about effective treatments. In the United States right now, we have a number of treatments that are regarded as well-established and evidence-based. These are applied around the country. They're both very specific treatments and model treatment programs. These have been associated with better outcomes. And here are some references. I'll leave the slide on just for 1 second. There are some new things, as the dean mentioned, that have come out around culture and cultural issues. These are important things to take a look at. We're also aware, and just as a little bit of an aside, there are some issues around gender that we think we may be underdiagnosing autism in girls, that they're a little better at camouflaging, and the autism spectrum may not be quite so evident in girls as it is in boys. And there's some important areas about minority service and minority underservice in the United States, with children and minority populations being under-recognized. So finally, let me thank our transdisciplinary team. At Southern, we have a great array of individuals covering all aspects of autism, from the medical to the educational to social work to communication to behavior. I'm teaching a class right now with recreational students to talk about how they can best include children with autism in recreational programs. And again, for more information, here is our website, and you can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and we have a YouTube channel as well. So thank you again very much for this wonderful opportunity to be involved in this presentation. We deeply appreciate it.
Dr. Volkmar, could you just go back to the slide before we transition on what we can do? Because I think there's a great link there for our services and training. Yeah, thank you very much. I know we're running short of time, but I just want to be sure that people have that link.
And this is the link to about 20 videos for teachers. They're being translated into many languages, Greek, right now, Greek, Italian is very far along, Norwegian, Russian. So we're hoping Chinese, and we're hoping Arabic. But again, we're hoping that these videos can be very practical tools for teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eze, back to you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say both a huge thank you to the Dean and also to Professor Fred for your leadership. And now it will give me great pleasure to hand across to one of our presenters, but obviously because of the time difference in China, we've had to take a video clip. It's Dr. N. Dian, President of China International Children's Center.
各位来宾、各位领导、各位科学家、专家、各位海内外的朋友们、女士们、先生们，大家非常好，因为你们是最棒的。我知道每个人都有自己的梦想，那么梦想是什么呢？梦想就是实现一个人、一群人、一个国家的自我价值。体现自我价值，就是要告诉大家，我们是有这样能力的人。我是双鱼座，天生爱做梦，那我就是一个必须有梦想的人。我的梦想就是做一个有用的人，能为很多人服务的人。很早的时候，我想做一个微软，被比尔盖茨抢了。 后来我说做一个苹果，又被乔布斯抢了。我终于有了一个新的梦想，做一个淘宝吧，没想到又被马云抢了。即使是这样，我也没有懊恼，为什么呢？因为我认为我是一个最牛的人，因为我想做的事情，只要我做了，都能成为大咖。有一天，我看到一条新闻，报道上面说，深圳有一个抱着自闭症孩子跳楼的母亲，给了我极大的震撼。那天，我的合伙人刘英刘总问我，说你看到那条新闻了吗？我说看到了。刘总说，我们能不能救救这些孩子们？一个爱的声音，一声爱的呼唤，向全世界发出请求，救救这些自闭症的孩子们吧，救救这些家庭吧。为了自闭症的孩子们健康成长保驾护航，从此就成为我最大的梦想。自闭症，一个幽灵般的名字。数据显示，全球自闭症患者7000万，中国自闭症患者1200万，自闭症儿童300多万。2020年，美国疾控中心公布了大约54个儿童中就有1个被诊断为 ASD。一组组扎心的数据，让人无不心痛。自闭症这个幽灵，给无数的孩子带来无尽的痛苦，给无数的家庭带来灭顶之灾。这不是耸人听闻。请看大屏幕。比比皆是。有人把自闭症的孩子比喻成天上的星星，那样孤独，闪烁着微弱的光芒。其实，我不这样认为。不能用星星来形容自闭症的孩子们，因为他们是太阳。因为每个孩子的心里都有着像太阳一般的光芒，像太阳般的炙热。他们呼喊着：“亲人们呐，你说的我都懂，我只是无法表达。”孩子们同样想正常的学习，正常的生活，他们期盼着和正常的孩子一样，得到爸爸妈妈的喜爱，得到社会的认可。可是，他们与外界沟通的大门关闭了。他们呼喊着：“我要打开这道门，请大家来帮帮我。”今天，大家都来了。有国际自闭症的科学家，有联合国的领导，各国各界的爱心人士。我代表自闭症的孩子们，感谢大家，加入我们的行列吧。我们需要你们，自闭症的孩子需要你们。谢谢大家。亿万阳光的宗旨是给孩子们一片阳光，让孩子们的世界无限温暖。再一次感谢各位来宾、各位领导、各位科学家、专家以及海内外的各位朋友们，感谢你们。
It now gives me great pleasure to hand across to Werner Obermeier, Director of World Health Organization here in New York, the New York office. Mr. Obermeier, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, my sister, Dr. Ogwoji, and it is really a pleasure for me to represent the World Health Organization in such esteemed company this morning. The Sustainable Development Goals and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities include multiple targets and endorse principles of action that relate to the health, well-being, and inclusion of children with autism and other developmental disabilities, as do the WHO Comprehensive Mental Health Action Plan, which was adopted by our World Health Assembly after long consultations with member states, and it urges countries to strengthen efforts to address the treatment gap for all mental and neurological conditions throughout the life course. The Secretary General of the United Nations actually launched the global strategy for women's, children's, and adolescent health in 2016, and this initiative runs through 2030. It articulates a vision whereby all key actors in health, nutrition, education, child and social protection sectors should work together to empower communities and family capabilities for the optimal health and well-being of all children so that no child is left behind. This applies equally to all 53 million children who have developmental disabilities, but the majority of them do not have access, as we have heard, to early interventions. Globally, access to supportive services remains inequitable and inadequate. Children with developmental disabilities and their families face stigma and discrimination, unjust deprivation of health and education services and opportunities to engage and participate in their communities. The work of the World Health Organization is mandated by the May 2014 World Health Assembly resolution, which is entitled Comprehensive and Coordinated Efforts for the Management of Autism Spectrum Disorders. And it focuses our efforts in many different areas, which I will talk to a little in the next few minutes. We have seen the evidence base growing. We know there are effective interventions that can improve developmental and well-being trajectories of children. And one of these methods is the World Health Organization Caregiver Skills Training, also known as CST. It was developed based on the available evidence to empower caregivers and families of children with developmental delays and disabilities to provide optimal support and opportunities for development and early learning. The program uses a family-centered approach. It's designed to be delivered by non-specialist nurses, community-based workers, or peer caregivers as part of a network of health, education, and social services for children and their families. Unfortunately, in Africa, the work being done on autism is extremely fragmented, even in my own country, South Africa. Since clinical psychologists with the skills to do the assessments are very few, often the diagnosis is not made until the child sees a psychiatrist, who may make a clinical diagnosis and manage the child as best as they can. But for those parents who can afford it, and depending on the severity, the child may or may not be taken to a private school with smaller classrooms and more accommodations. As we all know, in the vast majority of cases, this never happens. For children that have more severe conditions, parents may try to get a non-trained helper to support the child at home, but this is full-time care and can be very expensive. Obviously, most families cannot afford these costs, and perhaps due to stigma, children are often put into institutions where they remain until they are adults. So there is a clear need to implement more easily accessible evidence-based programs that require less resources. The CST, which I have mentioned before, is one of these. We actually investigated its feasibility and acceptability in rural settings in Kenya, where we had a trial to see if behavioral and communication and quality of life aspects of children could be improved. About 100 children living with the developmental disabilities and their family were involved in this randomized trial. And we evaluated the CSD program. Despite some challenges, many parents attended almost all the sessions, and we saw a decrease in behavioral problems scores for children who participated. also enhanced scores on family quality and life measure. So the study indicates quite clearly the program is feasible and can be even replicated in urban settings. We know in the 21st century, countries continue to lose too much valuable human capital as children and adolescents with developmental disabilities are not afforded opportunities to enhance and reach optimal human capital. They continue to be viewed through a lens of their functional and activity limitations rather than their abilities, their financial burden rather than their potential. The opportunity for habituation, greater self-sufficiency, social integration, and the hope for a paradigm shift in the public's views were actually elevated recently by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which just last year, towards the end of last year, had its conference of state parties here in New York. So across the globe, many countries are now making better efforts to comply with the mandates of this convention on the rights of the child. They are making better progress in developing condition-relevant national legislation and policies. These changes have resulted in greater opportunities for children and adolescents with developmental disabilities and their inclusion and participation in society. However, in most countries, efforts have been suboptimal, with inadequate diligence afforded to specific legislation, policies, and plans, and a lack of cross-cutting comprehensive approaches to addressing the needs of children and adolescents with developmental disabilities. In WHO, we are working with all these countries through our 149 country offices to ensure better compliance with legislation and also to develop new policies. Additionally, there have been deficits in implementation and monitoring of such policies among many of the countries involved. And unfortunately, we have seen the often still existing barriers and lack of services being greatly affected and interrupted by COVID-19. And this will remain interrupted at least for the medium term. It is the moral, legal, and financial obligation of every country to ensure the rights of each child, that all children have an optimal quality of life, where their strengths and abilities are nurtured and protected, and where they are supported in their areas of vulnerability. Let me conclude by giving a good example of one other country in Africa which focused on intersectoral coordination. In Uganda, the National Early Development Service Delivery Framework was developed to guide such early development service providers in all sectors at all levels. It's led by the Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development. A steering committee has been established and a technical committee which provides key national governance mechanisms for cross-cultural and cross-sectoral coordination. They function under 3 working groups, which focus on innovative financing, communication, and advocacy, and on monitoring, evaluation, and quality assurance. So the point here is, if Uganda can implement this successfully, it can easily be replicated throughout the whole continent. So in closing, let me just say that interventions for people with autism spectrum disorder need to be accompanied by broader actions for making physical, social, and attitudinal environments more accessible, inclusive, and supportive. And it is only by all of us working together that this can be achieved. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, my brother, Mr. Obermeyer. And it's very interesting to notice that the African continent in this virtual discussion is indeed being represented. You, my dear brother from South Africa, welcome. And my dear sister from Zimbabwe, and myself from my paternal side, my late father was Nigerian. So we are indeed enforcing the whole principle of Ubuntu, the interconnectedness of us on the African continent. And I take note of your point of what you said about Uganda. Uganda is doing extraordinary work in the aspects of autism, and I've had the pleasure of working with the permanent mission of Uganda to the United Nations, and also other African countries have indeed over the years come on board this initiative, more particularly Nigeria, South Sudan I've worked with, Angola, Kenya, and Malawi. So it is an ongoing process, but I am indeed delighted to have you here, not only as your capacity for the director of the World Health here in New York, but also as a South African. I welcome you, my brother. Welcome indeed. It now gives me great pleasure, again, our other speaker, Dr. Li, researcher of the Institute of Psychology, Chinese Academy of Science. Again, they had to send a video recording because of the time difference between New York and China. We shall have the video shown. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be given this opportunity to introduce myself and my team in the Institute of Psychology, Chinese Academy of Sciences. My name's Xinying Li. I'm a Chinese psychologist working in the area of childhood and adolescent mental health, such as autism spectrum disorder, depression, and anxiety. Our team is trying to answer the questions such as why are some individuals more vulnerable than others? And what's happening in their brain? And what can we do to promote their quality of life? And so forth. Today, instead of talking about what we have accomplished, I'm going to discuss some of the challenges Chinese researchers and clinicians are facing in their work on ASD. The first challenge is that we do not have an accurate estimation of the prevalence of ASD. As we already know, the prevalence of ASD in the United States is 1 in 55 children. The figure is even higher according to the latest literature. In China, according to some reports, this number is to be approximately 1%. However, this is not an official number because there is a lack of well-established epidemiological studies with large and representative samples. We believe that the prevalence of ASD in China should be very close to that in the United States, but we don't know. Beyond insufficient data, the second challenge is a lack of expertise. There are not many experts, clinicians, and therapists available to the patients and their family. We do have some well-trained clinicians who can diagnose ASD, but only in big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. This is probably one reason why many children with ASD have not been identified and diagnosed. As for the appropriate interventions, the number of BCBAs in mainland China is merely 34. And conversely, this number in the United States is 38,000. As a result, many patients in China are not receiving evidence-based therapy. Okay, to better serve children with ASD and their families, and to promote research on ASD in China, our team at the Institute of Psychology, CAS, is launching a couple of intervention programs. In one of such programs, we are trying to develop an intervention method that can be implemented by parents. If this method works, parents can do the intervention at home, thereby reducing the financial burden on parents. In another program, we are trying to develop a relatively simple diagnostic tool. Currently, the accepted and the most popular diagnostic tools are the ADOS2 and ADIR, but both of them are complicated, time-consuming, and require well-trained personnel. Thus, there is a clear need for new diagnostic tools and tailored to meet the needs of Chinese population. Finally, we are exploring the neural mechanisms of ASD through neuroimaging approach, such as fMRI and event-related potentials. Since my team used to answer scientific questions by using behavioral genetic approach, such as twin studies, we are also planning to investigate the genetic mechanisms of ASD by using a twin design. Okay, that's all of today's talk. I thank you all for this opportunity again, and I'm grateful for your time and attention. Thanks.
Now gives me great pleasure to turn across to my sister from the African continent, Miss Moya Lynn Nyandi, a lawyer in human rights, civil and political rights in sub-Saharan Africa. And she's also a mother of a 7-year-old boy on the autism spectrum. My sister, welcome.
Thank you very much. Of course, I'm not here as a medical professional or an expert, just here as a mother who's lived in the autism community for the past 8 years, and of course just still learning. It's a complex field, and even more complex for lay people like us. While we are certainly grateful for today's panel, which is in light of Autism Month awareness, for us as parents and children or people with autism, it's Monday, Tuesday, every day, every month is we live with autism. So, but while this is definitely the fact that there's a month designated for autism awareness, we have to reach a point where, as with all issues of advocacy, that the world continues to advocate every day, not just limiting it to 1 month and then moving on to the next subject. So I have been asked to speak, from my perspective, but I will try to intertwine it with the African experience of context on autism as well, particularly and Zimbabwe in particular. One of the challenges that we have, and as we've heard from numerous speakers, is the stigma around autism, primarily because it's viewed as a mental illness, and children being, or people individually literally being crazy or mad, and hence either they've been possessed by demons, or it's a spiritual issue, or they've been cursed by other family members or people who are out to get the family or the children. And hence even the response when a family comes to a situation where they're dealing with autism, they tend to respond with traditional means, either seeking consultation with traditional healers, or in some instances just being told to pray about it and continue to pray. And as a result, for a long time, either parents or families are in denial, or they exhaust those remedies first, and then only at that point when all else is exhausted do they then seek medical help with professionals like psychiatrists and developmental pediatricians. I'm not to dismiss prayer, as a Christian, as well as, as an African, not to dismiss our traditional practices. However, early intervention, as numerous speakers have spoken about, is key. My son, by the time he was diagnosed at the age of 2, yes, the diagnosis followed, but we had already noted developmental delays, and we were providing occupational therapy and speech, and that has helped tremendously for my son. And then one of the challenges again is just lack of awareness, because autism is a complex challenge. Unlike physical disabilities where like blindness or someone in a wheelchair, it's easy to explain. And now with the language, the differences in language, like native languages, how do you explain in our local languages like Shona and Ndebele that there's a neurological deficiency or neurotypical, atypical, those complex definitions or explanations of what exactly autism is. So explaining to a grandmother who probably has never heard of autism and trying to explain the challenges becomes fairly difficult. And hence one of the recommendations I make is that, and I'm glad, I think a couple of speakers spoke that they have broken down autism to teachers, but it needs to be further broken down to a level where ordinary people can understand, especially in remote areas on the continent. And then I wanted to just explain that, you know, the lack of awareness of autism is not just amongst, you know, family members and community, but in the Zimbabwean context, it's also amongst legislators and government. So you see that in a reflection in the lack of policy, robust policy to address autism. While yes, you know, CDC worldwide, there are statistics of how many children have autism. In Zimbabwe, I double checked, I know there were no statistics, but I double checked with, you know, colleagues in government, and there's absolutely no data. There has been no effort to identify which individuals in the country are autistic and on the spectrum. And this is very important because there's a perception that there's limited number of autism cases in Africa in comparison with the Western continent. Whether that is true or false, what reasons, because we're still studying autism to understand exactly what are the causes of autism. But if we don't have that kind of data and aren't unable to do a comparative study or invest in identifying what causes autism, at least on the African continent, then we're not in a good position to address it. So that's one of the recommendations, especially for individuals from the World Health Organization, to continue to work with African governments to ensure that at least from just data, how do you come up with policy that addresses an issue if you're not aware of what the data is? And then the other issue that I wanted to point out that affects the lack of, or as a result of the lack of awareness amongst our government policy providers and legislation. For example, I'll give insurance. Our insurance companies in Zimbabwe do not recognize autism. So for example, even those who have extremely good insurance and can go to specialists, it's only specialists for, let's say, limited periods for one time, like an optician or a gynecologist, but the cover does not cover the physical, like behavior therapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy for children or individuals with autism who require this for an unlimited period of time. So I am fortunate to live in the US at the moment, and with our insurance, once we've kept a certain amount, let's say halfway through the year, for the rest of the year, we continue to receive services at no cost to us and not out of pocket. Whereas colleagues in Zimbabwe, those who can afford insurance and specialist services, and I tell you, this is a very, very limited number of elite individuals, even then they face challenges with insurance not covering it. The other point I wanted to make was, while it's not all, you know, doom and gloom, the government is making an effort. My understanding is that the government has moved away, at least from special schools for people with special needs, and are trying very much to have the least restrictive environment or response, and ensuring that children with special needs are integrated in the classroom. But, you know, across the continent, not just in Zimbabwe, the average classroom is 45 to 60 children per teacher. And hence, in such an environment, it becomes almost impossible for a teacher to provide that extra attention that is often required for children with autism who have learning difficulties and need that extra time or a diverse way of teaching. Although the government has tried to implement training skills for teachers within the training curriculum, trying to introduce skills that teachers can be able to teach children with learning disabilities, we're still far off. And also the inability of learning tools, or let's say iPads, iPads and technical technical, sorry, the word is running away from me. But anyway, those tools, the additional tools that children in the developed world have to enable them to learn better, those are very limited on the continent in African schools. But I will note that from the time that I went to school, or way back, almost 30 years ago, there was a limited number of special needs schools. But right now, at least because of that gap in the limited number of special needs schools, a lot of individuals in the community have come up and put their resources together. And I can say certainly that there are numerous new schools for special needs children that have sprouted out in Harare or Zimbabwe. But unfortunately, those are limited to like the capital city, Harare, where we have numerous other cities in the outskirts. And hence the services are limited to those, first and foremost, those who can afford, and those who are in the main cities in the country. The other point I wanted to make was, you know, well, rather, lastly, the other point that I wanted to make was, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. My husband just came in. He was wondering why husbands were not invited to speak and just the moms. But anyway, so
you can invite.
Oh no, I've shooed him away. I've shooed him away. And you know, that's the one point I wanted to make was that a lot of just generally raising a child falls a lot on mothers. Just in general, it falls a lot on mothers, and even worse when it becomes, not even worse really, but when there's a child with special needs that is involved, there's a lot of caregiving and work. So the economic situation in Zimbabwe is extremely dire, not even throwing in people with disability that require extra care and extra finances and so forth. We have almost a 97% unemployment rate. And this is just for the economy in general. And you find that the government does not have resources. So even when you look at the budget, the national budget, what is allocated for people with disabilities is not necessarily specified that this is for people with disabilities. It's covered in a budget on social welfare. So you're not even sure of which amount specifically goes to addressing or working or improving the lives of people with disability. And especially with COVID, where people have not been able to go to work, and some children have not been able to go to school or learn online. This is especially impactful for children with disabilities. Speaking from a personal experience, we had to homeschool my son from August of last year up until a few weeks ago. And if teachers who are trained in teaching individuals with learning disabilities have challenges or find it difficult, let alone a parent who probably is not skilled as a teacher. And I noted a lot of parents who were complaining about teaching their children. And I'm thinking, your children are neurotypical, right? And my child has a learning disability, but I have to rise above that to be able to teach my child to ensure that they continue to have an education despite COVID. So I'm fortunate that the teachers worked very well with us, but it was incredibly difficult, an incredibly difficult time. Given that we've got limited time, I will stop here. But one last point I wanted to make was that it's not, while Africa has challenges in terms of resources, we are also a community that strives of Ubuntu, you know, and that is oneness. Whereas, let's say in the West, there's, you know, the economy and the social fabric is very individualized. In Africa, it's more community based. And usually, you know, as a child, you are a child of the village, and the village community can chasten you and so forth. Unfortunately, with the stigma, the fabric or the interconnectedness of Ubuntu has kind of waned. But however, if we push awareness and education, the African system has a natural system in which the society can come to the aid of the community. So for example, family members are able to help and take care of children with autism while the parents work, but they're only able to do that if they understand the child. And if they're able to step into the gap, if they can think that or get to know that this is not an illness or a curse and so forth, it's just a diversity in thinking, or a diversity in the way we are wired, then the African community will be in a much better position to respond. And hence, when we are coming up with policies in which to implement. It's not about just picking up what's working in the US and transporting it into Africa, but it's finding ways in which we can tap into the resources that are already there, the social fabric that is already there on the African continent, and making use of that. As I mentioned, the issue of, the Ubuntu that we have on the African continent. And this will go further in helping, because one point I had missed out was that we tend to respond as Africans to disciplining children mainly through physical discipline. And that is the response. That is the response to children with autism, as opposed to trying to learn their understanding, their thinking, and coming to their level. The instinct is to beat or to basically give a physical beating. So it's very, very important that the community is made aware of the challenges that children have with autism. It's not that they are spoiled, it's not that it's a curse, but it's just basically, a developmental delay that can be addressed through therapy and through therapies or any other early interventions that are there. Finally, I know there was talk of how do we identify or how do we identify or train individuals who can identify developmental delays. It's not about having more therapists, that's great, but a lot of women in the communities go to community clinics, which are not as advanced as a full-fledged medical hospital, or rely a lot on midwives. So it's very important that when the government is implementing policy to assist with or early intervention, is that there's training at that very basic level of midwives in the community or of clinics to identify developmental delays at that stage, and even to provide basic therapy. As a parent, I went through training where, for example, if your child cannot speak, how do you encourage them to speak? You put their favorite toy where they can see it, but out of their reach, such that they're forced to come to you to ask you for that thing. And this is just basic training that I received that I would not have otherwise, thought of, because I assumed that my child was neurotypical. So just small things or small training that parents can get in the homes as the primary caregivers, as well as the community, would go a long way in advancing, in improving awareness as well as responsiveness. That would go a great way in greatly assisting individuals with autism. I will end there. Once again, I'm privileged to have been able to participate here amongst experts and to share my perspectives as a mom. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much. I particularly like your African perspectives. Yes, you're correct. It takes a village to raise a child. And in Africa, where we have the extended family, but the main challenges we face is breaking down the stigma of autism, and also with children with disabilities. I believe there's more work needs to be done in that respect, to breaking down the stigma. It gives me great pleasure now to turn across again to Dr. Yen Feng, Associate Researcher of the Institute of Psychology, the Chinese Academy of Science. Again, we have to show a video because of the time difference in China.
In 1999, the autism spectrum disorder is an unfamiliar name for the Chinese people. At the moment, we have only 1 in 10,000 kids who suffer from this disease.
Maternal Evelyn Bucci from Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya. She's not been able to join us she's having difficulties with the internet. So we'll go across to Ms. Tien Fen, Vice Chairwoman of World Harmony Foundation, who will give a few words before we wrap up.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am Jennifer Tan, as a filmmaker work at Hollywood. And also, I am Vice Chairman of
World Harmony Foundation. My dear sister, Dr. Yugoji, and brother Frank Liu invited me to this project, which is help autism kids in Africa and China. That is a big, big honor for me. I really thank you so much. In the world, autism sickness is going fast and wild. One family, just because one autism kids can break down, they cry for help. For a screenwriter, director, and producer, the best thing I can do is with Dr. Yugoji to make a documentary about autism in Africa and China. Because I really admire her and respect to her. Because she's using her entire life as choir for continuing her request to raise awareness of autism in Africa and China. And also, I will be a good big bridge between America and China. I will do my best to help China, Hangzhou, building Sunshine Group, because they really want to help Chinese autism kids and family. In here, again, I want to congratulate this group, the president, Mr. N, and the CEO, Ms. Liu. They are so brave to join this project, to fight with autism, to really use their entire life to help the autism kids and family. I really love them. Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to Jennifer for that video, and I look forward to collaborating with her. So as we round up this virtual event on autism, highlighting it in Africa and China in the COVID-19 era, whilst implementing the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and towards Africa Agenda 2063. I'd like to say a few words that firstly, we hope that the aim and objective is to mobilize support amongst members of civil societies, academia, private, to develop private partnership, to develop initiatives to raise awareness of autism in Africa and China. I'd like to say that I look forward indeed to future collaboration with Dean and Dr. Stephen Hagedus, Dean of the College of Education, Southern Connecticut State University. Also Professor Fred Volkmer, Director of the Autism Center, Southern Connecticut State University, for developing initiatives in Africa and China, and hopefully also in the Caribbean. I'd like to give a huge thank you to my brother, Verma Obermeyer, the Director of the World Health Organization here in New York, and also to Dr. Li, researcher of the Institute of Psychology, China's Academy of Science, Dr. N, the President of China International Child Center, Dr. Jen Feng, the Associate Researcher of the Institute of Psychology, the Chinese Academy of Science, and a huge thank you to Jennifer Fenn, Vice Chairwoman of World Harmony Foundation, and of course to my dear brother, Frank Liu, the Chairman of the World Harmony Foundation. Indeed, I look forward to collaborating, as I say, with Southern Connecticut State University, and also with Professor Fred Volkmer on the important issue of autism awareness and training and education. One cannot underestimate the importance of education, more particularly as regards autism. Now, if I may conclude by quoting from Martin Luther King in a letter written in Birmingham, Alabama, on the 16th of April, 1963, I quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And I believe that we are all affected by autism and disabilities, whether it be on the African continent or in China or in Asia. So we need to work together. And again, in the principle of Ubuntu, we need to be a global village and be connected and indeed stay connected. So once again, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everybody, more particularly Dean Stephen, my brother from the United Kingdom across the pond, Professor Fred. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you again. I remember our time at the United Nations. And a huge thank you to my dear brother, Werner Obermeyer, my brother from the African continent. Africa, South Africa, and Nigeria were united together. And also to my dear sister from Zimbabwe. God bless you all, and I wish you have a nice day. Be safe and stay well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Be well.